Usually when we sit down to do one of these deep dives, we're looking at a specific event or maybe a scientific breakthrough or a trend in tech. But today feels different.
It does.
Today we're looking at a figure who feels less like a politician and more like a character out of a Shakespearean tragedy or maybe a Scorsese movie.
It's a bit of both, honestly. And probably a thriller novel thrown in there for good measure.
We are talking about Recep Tayyip Erdoğan. And looking at the stack of research we have today, and we should say this is primarily based on an incredibly deep profile and documentary film by Duro Balazada called Sultan Erdoğan. I'm just struck by the sheer range of labels attached to this man.
It's dizzying.
It's completely dizzying. I mean, depending on which page of the source you're reading, he's a partner, he's a pragmatist, or he's a dictator who is, and the source is explicit about this, being compared to some of the darkest figures of the 20th.
And that's the central tension, not just of the film, but of the entire Middle East right now. It is the question every single diplomat in Washington, in Brussels, and certainly in Jerusalem is asked.
Which is
Erdoğan a man the West and Israel can eventually work with again? Is there a rational actor in there somewhere, a pragmatist you can make a deal with? Or has he fully transformed into this ideological sultan who's genuinely trying to resurrect a dead empire?
And the source material, it really doesn't pull any punches on that transformation. It references his rhetoric being compared to Hitler's. It talks about a complete and total dismantling of Turkish democracy. But what I want to do in this deep dive is get past the headlines.
Yeah, we have to.
I want to understand how we got here. Because you don't just wake up one day and decide, I think I'll dismantle a republic today.
No, you don't. It's a long arc. It's a psychological journey as much as it is a political. And to understand it, we can't start at the presidential palace in Ankara. We can't even start in politics. We have to start in a very specific, very rough neighborhood in Istanbul about 71 years ago.
Pasha.
Kasım Pasha. Whole story right there.
I've been to Istanbul and I've seen the tourist spots, Blue Mosque, Hagar. Is Kasım Pasha anywhere near that stuff?
Geographically, it's not on the other side, but cultural. It might as well be a different planet. To understand Erdoğan, you really have to understand the mythology of this place.
Mythology. That's an interesting word for a neighborhood.
It is, because it's more than just a place on a map. The source makes a really interesting point about its history. Back in the Ottoman time, this was the Pasha.
Okay, so like the big shots.
Exactly. Admirals, generals, the elite lived there. It was the naval heart of the empire. It had status. It had prestige.
So it had a pedigree. It wasn't always a slum.
It had a major pedigree, yes. But by the time Erdoğan is born there in the 1950s, that pedigree had completely collapsed. It had become a slum. The film describes it as a place of just extreme poverty, narrow winding streets, and a very distinct demographic shift.
What kind of shift?
It became home to the Romani community. And the source material uses the historical term gypsy, and more importantly, to waves of working-class migrants from the Black Sea regions, the rough edge of the Gaza.
The source quotes a grandfather saying something like, "Don't enter Kasım Pasha." That suggests it wasn't just poor. It was
territorial. Very territorial. It was a place where you had to watch your back, where fights were common, where you learned to be tough because you had no other choice. And this is crucial for you, our listener, to grasp. Erdoğan isn't just from there. He is of there.
What's the difference?
He's a Kasım Pashalı. In Turkish culture, that is a loaded term. It's a type. It implies a specific kind of street smart, a swagger, a certain kind of toughness. It means you don't back down from a fight, ever. And you value loyalty, neighborhood loyalty, above the law.
It's the classic tough guy origin story. It reminds me of those stories of boxers coming up from the streets, fighting their way out.
That is the perfect analogy.
Yeah.
Because he was a fighter. But his arena wasn't the boxing ring. It was the football.
Okay, I wanted to ask about this because you often hear about politicians who played sports in high school, and usually it's just a footnote. It means they sat on the bench first. But the source says Erdoğan was legitimate.
He was more than legitimate. He was, by all accounts, the real deal, a serious talent.
We're talking professional potential.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There are people interviewed in the film who say he could have played for Fenerbahçe, one of the biggest clubs in Turkey.
Wow.
He was a striker, a forward. And I want you to just pause and think about the psychology of that position for a second.
Okay.
The striker is the tip of the spear.
Yeah.
You are the one who have to finish the job. You have to be a little bit selfish. You want the ball at your feet when the pressure is highest.
You want the glory.
You want to score the goal. The source notes that he had a lust for victory that was evident even then. He wasn't passing the ball just to be a nice guy. He wanted to win. He wanted to dominate.
So what happened? Why didn't we see Erdoğan playing in the European leagues? Why are we talking about him as a president and not a retired football?
One word, father.
Ah.
And this is, in my opinion, the Rosetta Stone for his entire psychological profile. If you want to understand why he governs the way he does, why he craves control, why he can't stand dissent. You have to look at his dad.
The source mentions an anecdote about his father that is, well, it's hard to read. It's pretty brutal.
It is. It's incredibly harsh. His father was a strict authoritarian figure, a classic patriarch. He was a captain in the Coast Guard, old school, very religious, and he didn't see football as a legitimate path for his son.
He saw it as a distraction.
Worse than that, a vice, almost. A waste of time that was taking him away from his religious study. The source recounts that his father actually beat him to stop him from playing.
Beat him.
Yes, physically beat him to force him to quit the team. He had a trial lined up with a major club, and his father forbade him from going and used physical force to make his point. He forced him to hang up his boots and focus on the Quran and his academics.
That's visceral. You have a young man, probably a teenager, finding his talent, his passion, his one ticket out of Kasım Pasha, and the ultimate authority figure in his life literally beats it out of him.
Exactly. Now play that forward. What does a child learn from that experience?
That power is everything.
That authority is absolute. They learn that power isn't negotiated, it's imposed. You don't argue with the man holding the stick. You don't reason with him. You either submit or you bide your time until you become the man holding the stick.
So he submits, he quits football, he goes to university.
He does. He gets a bachelor's degree in economics. But more importantly, he finds a new team. He finds a new arena to compete in. He falls in with intellectuals and activists connected to the Muslim Brotherhood.
So he trades the football pitch for political Islam.
He trades one uniform for another, and he takes that lust for victory, that striker's instinct, and he channels it into this new ideological framework. He's still trying to score goals, but now the goals are political.
But here is the contradiction that I found so fascinating in the research. When he finally gets a shot, when he steps onto the big stage, the 1994 mayoral race in Istanbul, he doesn't run as a fire-breathing Islamist.
Not at all.
He doesn't run on a platform of Sharia law for all.
Nope. He runs as the guy who is going to pick up the trash.
The fixer.
The fixer.
Yeah.
The pragmatist. You have to remember the context of Istanbul in the early 90s. The secular party, the so-called elites who had run Turkey since Ataturk, were seen as deeply corrupt, tired, and completely disconnected from the people.
And the city was falling apart.
Literally. The water didn't run consistently. The air was so polluted you could barely breathe. And the garbage. There were mountains of garbage piling up in the streets. Istanbul was dying. It was on the brink of collapse.
And into this mess walks the guy from Kasım Pasha.
Exactly. Here comes Erdoğan. He's the ultimate underdog. Nobody in the secular establishment thought he had a prayer of winning. But he has that Kasım Pasha hustle. He goes door to door. He shakes hands in the slum, talks about clean water and safe street, and he pulls off a massive, stunning upset.
So he gets in. He's the mayor of one of the world's great. Now does he start banning alcohol and preaching from the balcony of City Hall?
That's the thing he doesn't. He does the opposite. He gets to work. The source describes him as perhaps the most diligent, hardworking, and effective mayor Istanbul had ever seen.
Really?
Yes, he actually delivered. He cleaned up the water supply. He planted trees. He cleared the trash. He greenlit massive infrastructure projects. He was effective. He got things done.
So if you were a secular upper-class resident of Istanbul in 1995, even if you hated his religious politics, you probably liked the fact that your commute was suddenly shorter and you could drink the tap water.
Precise. He won people over with competence, not just ideology. He proved that political Islam could be efficient. It could be modern. It could deliver services better than the corrupt old guard. And this competence bought him a lot of runway.
And this is also the period, and this is going to surprise a lot of people who only know the current headlines, where we see what the source calls the golden of relations.
Oh, this part of the film really threw me. It's hard to even imagine now.
Because today, the narrative is that Erdoğan and Israel are these natural, intractable enemies. But the source paints a picture of, and I'm quoting, a military alliance.
It was deeper than just military. It was cultural. It was economic. During his mayoral years and his early years as prime minister, the relationship was incredibly warm.
What did that look like on?
The source talks about Israeli tourists flooding the Grand Bazaar in Istanbul, Turkish merchants in the markets learning to speak Hebrew because it was good for business. There was this genuine warmth between the people.
And Erdoğan himself, was he just, tolerating this because it was state policy?
No. He was an active participant in it. He was meeting regularly with the chief rabbi of Turkey. He was personally facilitating exhibitions from the Topkapi Palace and the Museum of Islam to be shown in Jerusalem. He was courting Jewish business leaders, openly acknowledging their community's contribution to Islamic economy.
He was the face of a modern, open, Western-facing Turkey.
100%. He was the guy the West wanted him. A moderate Muslim Democrat who could bridge the gap with Israel.
There's one specific story in the notes that I think captures this lost era perfectly. It's the anecdote about the dinner with the diplomat.
Yeah, story of Eddie. It's a fantastic little moment.
Eddie, so walk us through that interaction, because it feels so intimate and so human compared to the shouting match today.
So Eddie is an Israeli diplomat, the consul, stationed in Turkey at the time. She's at a formal dinner, and she's seated near Erdoğan, who's the mayor. Now, you have to remember, at this time, the secular Turkish press is just tearing Erdoğan apart every single day.
Right.
They're calling him a dangerous fundamentalist, a backward hick. He feels besieged. He's the mayor, but he feels like the outsider at his own party, you know?
He's the guy from the slums in a room full of the city's elites who despise him.
Exactly. And Eddie, the Israeli diplomat, decides to break the ice. She leans over to him and tells him in Turkish, "I'm also a hemsheri."
Which means what exactly?
It means townsman, or more colloquially, someone from the same neighborhood, the same village, a hometown person. She tells him she was also born in Kasımpaşa.
No way. An Israeli diplomat from Kasımpaşa.
The source says his face just completely lit up. He turned to her and said, "Don't say it." Like just pure, unadulterated delight. And in that 1 second, he isn't the Islamist mayor, and she isn't the Zionist diplomat.
They're just two kids from the old neighborhood.
They're just two Kasımpaşalıs. And then started swapping stories about the streets, the smells, the vibe of the place. They had this instant connection.
That is such a human moment. It's hard to reconcile with the man we see today.
And then this is the real kicker, the historical irony. They started bonding over their shared enemies, specifically the press. Eddie tells him, you know, the press treated Richard Nixon this way too. Don't let them get you down. She was trying to cheer him up.
An Israeli diplomat is comparing him to Nixon to give him a pep talk against the Turkish media. The irony is so thick you could cut it with a knife.
It's unbelievable, especially considering what Erdoğan would later do to the Turkish press, basically eradicating. But in that moment, it shows that the hatred, the animosity, it wasn't inevitable. There was a path where he remained a pragmatic, conservative partner.
He wasn't born hating Israel.
No, it was a learned behavior. It was a political choice he made later.
So what changed? What snapped? Because the source points to a very specific moment where the system, the old secular system, tried to destroy, and in failing, they instead created a monster. It all revolves around
the poem. It sounds ridiculous to Western ears, doesn't it? Politician jailed for reciting poetry.
Sounds like a fable. Or something out of the Middle Ages, not a modern republic.
But in Turkey, in the late 90s, the secular state was incredibly fragile and, frankly, paranoid. The army, in particular, viewed itself as the sacred guardian of Ataturk's secularism.
They were the final backstop.
They were the final backstop. And they were watching Erdoğan like hawk, just waiting for him to slip up. They needed a pretext, any reason, to take him off the board politically.
And he gave them one.
He gave them exactly what they were looking for. At a political rally, he recited a poem by Ziya Gökalp, a Turkish nationalist poet.
And the lines are pretty provocative.
They are. The minarets are our bayonets, the domes are helmets, the mosques are barracks, and the faithful are soldiers.
I mean, let's be fair. That is definitely martial language. Minarets are bayonets. It's aggressive. There's no way around that.
To you and me, it's aggressive poetry. To the Turkish generals, that was a declaration of war. That was a call for an Islamist uprising. That was incitement. So they pounced.
What did they do?
They used the courts. They stripped him of his mayorship. They threw him in prison for 4 months. And most importantly, they slapped him with a lifetime political ban.
This is the political catch-22.
Right. It was a clever legal trap. The Turkish law at the time stated that if you have a criminal record for incitement, you can't be a member of parliament. And if you can't be an MP, you can't be prime minister. So the army and the secular establishment thought, checkmate, we've killed his career. He's finished.
But they didn't understand the Kasımpaşa rule.
They didn't understand that in politics, especially in that part of the world, martyrdom is currency. By jailing him, they proved every single one of his supporters' conspiracy theories right. They proved that the corrupt, godless elites were out to get the man of the people.
So when he walked out of that prison...
he wasn't just a politician anymore. He was a symbol. He was a hero who had suffered for his beliefs. He was more powerful than ever.
And this leads to what the source calls the Santa Claus maneuver. I laughed out loud when I read this image, but it's actually brilliant.
It is a perfect, vivid metaphor. The source says it like this. They locked the front door of Parliament, so he came down the chimney.
How did he do that?
While he was banned from running, his new party, the AKP, contested the next general election. And they won. They didn't just win. They won in a landslide. They had such a massive majority in Parliament that their very first act was to just change the Constitution.
They just rewrote the law that banned him.
They just deleted it. Then they held a quick by-election in his home district, he won, and walked into Parliament not just as an MP, but as the undisputed leader of the country.
So he didn't just walk in the front door. He had his party rebuild the entire house so the door was exactly where he wanted.
And that is the moment the Sultan really begins to emerge, because he learned a valuable lesson. He realized that the old system, courts, the army, the media, was designed to stop him. It was an obstacle. So he decided he would have to slowly methodically and ruthlessly dismantle that system piece by piece.
And to do that, to consolidate that kind of absolute power, you need an enemy. You need something or someone to rally the base against.
He always needed it. And this is where the relationship with Israel starts its downward spiral. The source argues this wasn't an emotional snap, at least not at first. Cold, it was calculated. Israel, the source says, is the ideal rival.
Why pick a fight with a country you have a military alliance with? It seems counterintuitive.
Because it unifies the Muslim world, or at least the Sunni Muslim. If your ambition is to be the leader of the entire Islamic world, not just the president of Turkey, you have to be the primary defender of the Palestinians. You have to be the voice that shouts at the West and at Israel.
And it distracts from problems at home.
It's the oldest trick in the book. It draws attention away from a struggling economy or domestic political issues and focuses it on a righteous external crusade.
And the shouting. It started in a very unlikely place. Davos, 2009, the 1-minute moment.
This is the turning point, the big public break. The setting is the World Economic Forum in Switzerland. You have Erdoğan on a panel sitting right next to Shimon Peres, the president of Israel at the time. They're supposed to be discussing the recent war in Gaza.
And usually Davos it's very polite. It's all hushed tones and careful diplomatic language. It's billionaires in snow boots drinking expensive hot chocolate.
It's the ultimate cocktail party for the global elite. But Erdoğan completely breaks the fourth wall. He doesn't play by the rules. He starts screaming. He literally starts shouting and pointing his finger at Shimon Peres.
And what does he say? The quotes from the source are just...
He looks at Peres and says, "Your voice is loud because you are guilty." He accuses him of murder. And then he drops the line that echoed around the world. "When it comes to killing, you know well how to kill. I know how you killed children on the beaches."
And the moderator tries to...
The moderator, David Ignatius from the Washington Post, tries to cut him off because he's out of time. And Erdoğan just gets more furious, shouting, 1 minute, demanding more time to speak.
And then he just walks off the stage.
He packs up his papers, says, "I'm finished with Davos," and storms out. He turns his back on Shimon Peres. In diplomatic terms, that is the nuclear option. It is the ultimate insult. But here's what you have to understand. He didn't care about the people now. He didn't care about David Ignatius or Shimon Peres or the assembled billionaires.
He cared about the audience back home.
He was playing to the street in Istanbul and Cairo and Damascus.
How did they react?
He landed back in Istanbul at 2 o'clock in the morning, and there were thousands and thousands of people waiting for him at the airport, waving Turkish and Palestinian flags, cheering him like a conquering hero. The source says this was the moment he officially claimed the mantle of the leader of the Muslim world. He stood up to the arrogant West and the Zionist entity.
He was their champion.
He was their sultan. And he realized in that moment that conflict with Israel wasn't a liability. It was political.
So Davos sets the new tone. But then we get into this really ugly spiral of humiliation and retaliation. And we have to talk about the low chair, because this feels like a sketch from a bad comedy show, but it had real serious geopolitical consequences.
It is completely absurd, but it reveals so much about the ego and the pride involved on both sides of this conflict. Tensions are incredibly high post-Davos. The Israeli Foreign Ministry wants to send a message, a red line, to the Turkish ambassador.
A warning.
A warning. So Danny Alon, who is the deputy foreign minister, summons the Turkish ambassador to his office.
But it's a setup.
He stages the room. He stages the entire room for the camera. He deliberately puts the Turkish ambassador on a low sofa, almost like a footstool. And he and the other Israeli officials sit on high, upright chairs, literally looking down on him.
It's Power Play 101. I am big, you are small.
It is literally that. And just in case the symbolism was too subtle for the press, Aylan turns to the Israeli camera crew, speaking in Hebrew, assuming the ambassador wouldn't understand, and he says, "Pay attention. Make sure you capture that he is sitting lower and we are sitting higher, and that there is only an Israeli flag on the table."
And the mic was hot. The audio was recorded.
The mic was hot. The world heard him spelling out the humiliation he was orchestrating.
You cannot do that to any country's representative, but you definitely can't do that to Turkey, a former imperial power. And you absolutely cannot do that to a man like Erdoğan, given everything we know about his background and his sense of pride.
It was a grave, grave insult to national honor. Erdoğan went ballistic. And frankly, he had a point. It was amateurish, foolish diplomacy, but it fed his narrative perfectly. See? This is how they see us. They despise us. They look down on us. They treat us like servants.
And then just a few months later, the symbolism tragically turned into real violence, the Mavi Marmara.
2010, the Gaza flotilla. Now, the source is very specific here, and it's an important distinction. It describes the IHH, the group that organized the flotilla, as a terror-linked organization that is very close to Erdoğan and his government.
So this wasn't just a bunch of peace activists spontaneously deciding to deliver rice and medicine to Gaza.
The source argues that it was, in fact, a trap. It calls it a media terror attack. The goal wasn't just to break the naval blockade of Gaza. Yes, that was part of it. But the primary goal, according to the film, was to force a violent confrontation.
They wanted Israel to attack.
They needed the footage.
Yeah.
They needed images of Israeli soldiers clashing with Turkish civilians to broadcast across the Muslim world.
And Israel walked right into the trap.
They took the bait. Israeli commandos rappelled from helicopters onto the deck of the main ship, the Mavi Marmara. They were expecting passive resistance, chanting, maybe people locking arms.
And that's not what they found.
Not at all. The source details that they were met by a group of activists with iron bars, knives, and other makeshift weapons. It was organized, violent resistance. A melee broke out and the commandos opened fire. When it was over, 10 people were dead. 9 of them were Turkish citizens.
And that just broke the relationship completely. There was no coming back from that.
It severed it. Ambassadors were pulled out. All military cooperation was frozen. Erdoğan went on television daily, calling Israel baby killer and a terrorist state. He demanded 2 things, a formal apology and financial compensation for the families of the dead. And he was not going to back down.
And he eventually got both, didn't he? Thanks to a very powerful third party.
He did, thanks to the President of the United States, Barack Obama.
The famous tarmac call.
It's an incredible story. It's March 2013. President Obama is wrapping up a visit to Israel. He is literally about to fly out of Tel Aviv. He has one foot on the steps of Air Force One, and he essentially pulls Prime Minister Netanyahu aside and says, you have to make this call right now.
Make the call, Bibi.
Basically, Netanyahu, under immense pressure from his biggest ally, gets on the phone, he calls Erdoğan, and he apologizes. He uses the phrase operational errors during the raid, and he agrees to begin negotiations for compensation.
Which Israel eventually paid. The source mentions a figure of $10 million per family.
A massive payout. It was a huge political victory for Erdoğan. He got the apology he demanded, he got the money, he made Israel bend the knee.
But did it actually fix the relationship?
Not in a meaningful way. It closed the file on that specific incident.
Yeah.
But the trust was gone. The golden age was a distant, almost mythical memory. Erdoğan had moved on. He had a bigger vision now. He didn't want to be Israel's partner. He wanted to be Israel's judge, jury, and rival for regional dominance.
But before he could fully achieve that vision, he had to survive one last biggest test of his life. July 5th, 20.
The night of the bridge, the coup attempt.
I remember watching this unfold live on the surreal Panks blocking the Bosphorus Bridge in Istanbul, F-16s flying low over Ankara, bombing the parliament building. It looked for all the world like the end of Erdoğan.
It really did.
It looked like the secular army, the institution he'd been fighting his whole life, was finally taking him out.
It was a coup attempt by a significant faction of the military. For about 24 to 48 hours, the fate of the republic genuinely hung in the balance. They took over the state broadcaster. They announced they were in control. They were hunting for him, and he was on vacation at a seaside resort.
And this is where the famous FaceTime moment happens, which is just one of the great ironies of modern history.
It's the ultimate irony. Erdoğan, a man who had repeatedly banned Twitter and YouTube in Turkey, uses an Apple iPhone to save his own government. He calls into CNN Turk via FaceTime.
And he appears on this tiny little screen, held up to the camera by a visibly trembling news anchor.
And through that tiny screen, he gives the speech of his life. He tells the people of Turkey, go to the squares, go to the airports, take back your country.
And they did. It was astonishing.
They did. Civilians, ordinary people, poured into the streets. They threw themselves in front of tanks. They climbed onto armored vehicles and pulled soldiers out of the turrets. It was bloody and chaotic. Over 250 people died that night, but the coup collapsed. The people saved the Sultan.
And when Erdoğan finally landed safely in Istanbul later that night, he stepped off the plane, said something that still chills.
He called the coup a gift from God.
A gift. That is a terrifying thing to say about a national tragedy where hundreds of your own citizens just died.
It is a terrifying thing to say, but it is also a moment of pure, unvarnished Machiavellian brilliance. Why was it a gift?
Because it gave him the perfect excuse to do what he always wanted.
It gave him the pretext he needed to finish the job he started in Kasımpaşa. It gave him a blank check to finally totally cleanse the state of all his enemies, real and imagined.
The purge.
The Great Purge. He didn't just arrest the soldiers who participated in the coup. He arrested everyone, tens of thousands of people. Journalists, judges, prosecutors, teachers, university deans, police officers. Anyone even suspected of disloyalty was rounded up. And most importantly, he broke the back of the military.
The institution that had jailed him for the poem.
The very same one. He completely decapitated it. He fired thousands of officers, including more than 100 generals and admirals. He restructured the entire chain of command to report directly to him. The secular army's power as a check on his rule was annihilated overnight.
So, post-2016, there are no more checks and balances. The game is over.
There are none. He uses the momentum from the failed coup to push through a referendum that transitions the country from a parliamentary system to an executive presidency, concentrating all power in his hand. He builds a new presidential palace with 1,100 rooms. He becomes the state. The transformation is complete. The Sultan is no longer a nickname, it's a job description.
And so what does this new Sultan want? What is the grand vision?
The source has a name for it, Neo-Ottomanism. It's the ambition, the dream of restoring Turkey to the status of a great imperial power. The idea that Turkey shouldn't just be a junior NATO member on the edge of Europe. It should be an empire in its own right, a hegemon that projects power across the Middle East, North Africa, and Central Asia.
And that puts him on a direct collision course with the other would-be hegemon in the region, Iran.
This is a crucial nuance that a lot of Western listeners miss. They often lump political Islam altogether. But Erdoğan is a Sunni Islamist. He views Shiite Iran as his primary ideological and geopolitical rival.
They're competing for the same prize.
They are competing for the soul of the Middle East. They are on opposite sides in Syria, in Iraq, in the Caucasus. The source uses a great simple metaphor here. It is dangerous to let this cat guard the cream. Meaning Erdogan's ambitions are so vast and so aggressive that he destabilizes everything he touches. He's intervening in Syria. He's sending troops and drones to Libya. He's challenging Greece in the Mediterranean. He wants to replace Iran as the dominant power, but he also wants to lead the global fight against Israel. He wants it all.
And yet, and this is the final maddening contradiction that the source highlights, the trade.
It does. It's the ultimate paradox. While he's on stage calling Israeli leaders Nazis and baby killers, ships are still sailing from the port of Haifa to Turkey. Turkish construction companies are still building projects in Israel. The pragmatism, the economic reality still flickers underneath the ideological fire.
But the source warns that the ideology is hardened.
It is. The Sultan persona is becoming the only persona. He seems to believe his own propaganda. He genuinely sees himself as the protector of all Muslims, with a special duty to liberate Jerusalem. The pragmatist is being consumed by the ideal.
It's a tragedy, in a way, when you look at the whole arc that we've just discussed. The talented boy from Qasim Pasha who just wanted to play football, the diligent mayor who just wanted to clean up the trash, the leader who sat with an Israeli diplomat and laughed about their shared old neighborhood. And now you have this isolated, angry figure in a giant palace surrounded by enemies, both real and perceived.
It is the classic tragedy of power. The boy from Qasim Pasha fought the system, and he won. He utterly vanquished his enemies. He became the system. But in doing so, he destroyed the very democratic openness that allowed him to rise in the first. He's become the man with the stick that his own father.
The source leaves us with one final provocative thought, a comparison that I found really, really unsettling.
Yes, it's a chilling idea. The suggestion is that on a long enough timeline, Turkey is becoming Iran, and Iran is becoming Turkey.
Unpack that for us. What does that mean?
Well, look at Iran today. You have this brutally repressive religious regime, the mullahs, but the people, especially the youth, are increasingly They are secularizing. They are protesting for freedom. They are tired of the theocracy. The regime is religious, but society is moving away from it.
Okay. And Turkey?
Turkey, the source argues, is moving in the exact opposite direction. You have a society that was, for a century, officially secular, but now the state under Erdoğan is becoming more religious, more authoritarian, more rigid. While the Iranian people are looking for freedom, the Turkish state is clamping down on it.
There are two ships passing in the night heading in opposite directions.
That's the argument. A once secular republic becoming an Islamic autocracy, while an Islamic theocracy dreams of becoming a secular republic.
That is a very heavy thought.
It raises the ultimate question for you, for our listener to think about. In a region where alliances shift like desert sand, can a leader driven by such deep personal grievances and such vast imperial dreams ever truly be a partner again? Or is the Sultan from Qasim Pasha now the permanent, unchangeable face of Turkey?
Is the pragmatist gone for good? That's the question.
I want you to picture a map of the Middle East. You've seen it 1,000 times on the news, on your phone, in history class. You see the borders of Syria, Iraq, Israel, Turkey, those rigid lines drawn in the sand by French and British diplomats in fancy suits about 100 years ago.
The Sykes-Picot lines, the borders that really define the entire 20th century.
Exactly. But today, we aren't looking at that map. Or maybe we are looking at it through a very specific and frankly a very different set of eyes. We're looking at it through the eyes of Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan. Because according to this stack of intelligence reports, translations of speeches, and foreign policy analysis we've gone through for this deep dive, he doesn't see those lines.
No, not at all. He sees ghosts.
Ghosts? That's evocative. What do you mean by that?
He sees the ghosts of 1914. He sees the Ottoman Empire before it all fell apart. And the central argument in this material, and this is really the thing we need to get our heads around today, is that the chaos we are watching right now, from the ruins of Gaza to the rebel strongholds in Syria, isn't just random violence. It's part of a 50-year project to erase those modern borders and revive an imperial map.
Wow. Okay, that is a massive claim. Because usually when we talk about Erdogan in the West, we talk about him as a spoiler. The guy who holds up a NATO vote for a few months for leverage, or the guy who, yells at Israel at the UN. But you're saying the sources paint him as something much more systematic.
Much more. Far more. We aren't talking about a politician who's just trying to win the next local election, though let's be honest, he's very, very good at that. We are talking about a man who wants his name written in the history books next to Sultan the Magnificent. And to understand how he plans to do that, we have to track a transformation. Frankly, it's jarring.
This is the Jekyll and Hyde moment the sources keep describing.
It really is. And to get it, you have to rewind the clock. Not far. Just go back to September 2023. Let's call it pre-October 7 Erdoğan.
Okay, September 2023. What does the world look like from Ankara? What's on his mind?
It looks profitable. It looks pragmatic. At that moment, Erdoğan was in the middle of a massive charm offense, a complete diplomatic reset. He was shaking hands with everyone he used to insult. He was repairing ties with Egypt, with Saudi Arabia, and most shockingly, with Israel.
I remember this. Israeli President Isaac Herzog visited Ankara.
Yeah.
That felt like a huge deal.
It was a massive deal. And it wasn't a secret backdoor meeting either. This was a full state visit.
Right.
Red carpets, brass bands, Turkish flags flying next to Israeli flags at the presidential palace. It was so surreal for anyone who had watched the previous decade of constant tension.
So why? Why the sudden change of heart? Erdoğan built his entire political brand on being the champion of the Palestinians. So why roll out the red carpet for the president of Israel?
Cold, hard economics. In 2 words, natural gas.
Energy. It always comes back to energy.
Always, you have to remember, Turkey is a huge energy-hungry nation with very few resources. They import almost every oil, gas, you name it, huge drain on them. Meanwhile, right next door in the Mediterranean, Israel discovers these massive offshore gas, Leviathan, Tamar, billions of dollars worth of gas just sitting there.
And that gas needs to go somewhere. Israel can't use it all.
Exactly. And who's the biggest potential customer? Europe. And what is Europe desperate?
Non-Russian gas, especially after Ukraine.
Bingo. So you have a perfect marriage of Israel has the gas, Europe wants the gas, and Turkey. Turkey has the land, it has the pipelines. It's the cheapest, most direct route to get that gas from the Mediterranean.
So Erdoğan was positioning himself as the indispensable middle toll booth.
He looked at the balance sheet and he could be an ideologue or he could be the energy hub and in September 2023, he chose to be the energy hub. He was acting like the CEO of...
It makes sense. It's rational. Money talks, ideology walks, I guess.
Money talk for a while.
But then, October 7th happened. Hamas attacks Israel. Israel responds with overwhelming force, and the CEO just vanishes.
Completely. But here is the nuance that I found really, really fascinating in the source material. It wasn't instantaneous. It wasn't like a light switch.
It wasn't. I feel like the rhetoric heated up almost immediately.
Not from Turkey.
Yeah.
Not on day 1 or day 2. If you look at the timeline the analysts put together, there was this very distinct calculation phase, a pause. While the U.S. and Europe were immediately condemning the atrocities, and while Iran was openly celebrating them, Ankara was
waiting, watching,
measuring. The sources suggest Erdoğan was watching 2 things very carefully. First, the scale of the Israeli military response. He wanted to see if this was going to be a quick targeted raid or a full-scale invasion of Gaza.
And second,
he was measuring the temperature of the street, not just in Turkey, but across the entire Muslim. He was watching Al Jazeera, he was watching social media, he was getting reports from his embassy.
He was basically checking the polls on a global scale.
In a way, yes. He was watching the anger rise and rise, and once he realized that this was going to be a long, brutal war and that the anger in his own political base was boiling over, that's when the CEO was fired and the Sultan.
The sources use pretty intense language to describe this shift. They say the war in Gaza hit Erdoğan in his soul, that it was a personal insult. Now, I have to play devil's advocate here. Is that real? Is it genuine ideological fervor, or is that just brilliant political theater to distract from, 60% inflation back home?
And that is the million-dollar question, and the consensus in these documents both. You absolutely cannot separate the two. It's a mistake to think it's one or the other. But you cannot underestimate the genuine ideological driver here. We in the West often forget who Erdoğan actually is at his core.
He's a product of the Muslim Brotherhood.
To his bone. He isn't just a Muslim president in a secular country. He is an Islamist political activist who has been working his entire life to reshape that country. His entire worldview is built on the idea that religious political leadership is superior to secular or national.
So when he looks at the Palestinians, he doesn't just see a single group of people.
No, he sees a civil war within the Palestinian cause. On one side, you have Fatah in the West Bank. They're secular, they're nationalists, they're often seen as corrupt, they wear a suit, the West. On the other side, you have Hamas in Gaza. They're religious, they're Islamists, they are a direct offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood.
So he doesn't just support Palestine, he supports the Islamist version of Palestine. He picks a side.
Precisely. He doesn't view Hamas as a terrorist organization, and the source material quotes him directly and repeatedly on this. He views them as mujahideen, as a liberation group, and as the legitimate religious leadership. But there's an analogy in the notes here that I think really nails the psychology.
The daughter movement.
Yeah. The source asks us to imagine how a Jewish community in London or New York views the state of Israel, even if they don't agree with the prime minister, even if they've never lived there. They feel a deep kinship, a duty to protect. It's tribal.
It's family. Blood is thicker than water.
It's family. Erdoğan looks at Hamas, and he doesn't see a foreign militia. He sees a daughter movement. He sees kin. So when the IDF strikes Gaza, Erdoğan doesn't process it as a purely geopolitical event. He processes it as an assault on his extended family. That's why the rational gas deals went right out the window. You don't do business with the guy who's bombing your family.
Which is a powerful emotional driver, but it has real-world costs.
Yeah.
And let's talk about the cost of that family loyalty, because usually in international relations, countries can yell at each other while still doing business under the table. Money usually talks louder than ideology, but the sources point out something truly historic happened with the trade relationship.
This is a major deviation from the norm. Historically, Turkey and Israel have had vicious diplomatic spats. They've pulled ambassadors. They've shouted at each other at the UN. But the ships kept moving. The trade volume, almost without fail, kept going up because the business communities in both countries are so deeply linked.
No, not this time.
Not this time. For the first time in the history of the two countries, Turkey completely severed trade relations. They didn't just slow them down, they banned exports in dozens of categories. We're talking steel, cement, jet fuel, construction materials, until a full and permanent ceasefire is declared. This is full-blown economic warfare.
Steel and cement. Wow, those aren't consumer goods like, oranges and television. Those are the building blocks of a country, of an army.
Precise. The goal was to choke off Israel's construction sector and, frankly, their military infrastructure. It's a move designed to inflict tangible pain. It wasn't just a press release.
But did it work? I mean, did it cripple the Israeli economy? And maybe more importantly, did it backfire on Turkey? Because if I'm a Turkish cement manufacturer and suddenly my biggest client is gone overnight, I am not happy with the Sultan. That's a huge risk.
And that is where the domestic distraction part of the equation comes in, but also where the Gulf pivot saves the day for Erdoğan.
The Gulf pivot. Explain that.
Look, Erdoğan is a strategist. He's not just driven by emotion. He knew that cutting off Israel, which is a significant billion-dollar market, would leave a big hole in his balance sheet, a hole he couldn't afford with the Turkish lira already struggling so bad. So before he made this dramatic move, what did he do over the preceding? He repaired relations with Saudi Arabia and the UAE.
Right, which is interesting because he was fighting a proxy war with them for years over the Qatar blockade, the Khashoggi murder, the Muslim Brotherhood. I mean, it was a bitter rivalry.
Incredibly bitter. But he swallowed his pride and buried the hatchet. Why? Because the Saudi and UAE economies are massive. They were so much larger and more significant as power in terms of sheer purchasing power for Turkish goods.
So in effect, Erdoğan swapped the Israeli market for the Gulf.
He rebalanced his portfolio before he cashed out his stock. He replaced the shekel with the rial and the dirham. It was calculated move that allowed him to have his cake.
So he could afford to be the ideological hero for his base.
Precise. He gets to stand on the podium and say, I am the only leader in the Muslim world willing to sacrifice trade for the sake of our brothers in Gaza, cementing his brand as the Sultan, while quietly filling the economic void with Gulf. It's a masterstroke, even if it burns long-term bridges with the West and Israel.
It really does. It cements his status as the leader who actually does. While everyone else is issuing carefully worded press releases, he's stopping the ship.
And that man of action persona is exactly what he wants to leverage for the next phase plan, which is perhaps the most dangerous part of all the source material we have in front of us.
You're talking about the boots on the ground proposal.
Yes.
What?
This is where we move from economic and rhetorical warfare to a potential direct military presence.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Erdoğan is pushing hard, and the sources say he's specifically using his leverage with the U.S. and, potentially a future Trump administration to be part of the day after solution in Gaza. He's proposing that Turkish soldiers be stationed inside Gaza as peacekeepers.
And on the surface, to a Western diplomat sitting in a conference room in Geneva, this might sound like a plausible solution. Hey, we need a Muslim nation to help secure the area. Turkey has a big army. They're in NATO. Let's use them. It checks a lot of boxes.
It sounds reasonable. But the sources we read are basically screaming, danger, in big red letters. Why? What's the catch? Why is Turkish peacekeeping seen as so bad for the region?
The source uses a very colorful analogy here. It says, "It is dangerous to let the cat guard the cream."
The cat being Turkey and the cream being what, Hamas?
The cream being the future control of Gaza. But there is a darker, more concrete theory presented here, which we can call the Roach Motel theory of Turkish foreign policy.
I think I know where this is going. They check in, but they don't.
They never ever check out. The source lists the track record, and when you see it all laid out in one place, it's staggering. Let's just go through it. Look at northern Cyprus.
Okay, 1974, they invaded.
They went in to protect the Turkish minority, a peacekeeping mission. 50 years later, there are tens of thousands of Turkish troops there. It's a de facto Turkish state. Okay, look at northern Syria. They went in to create a buffer zone against terrorism. What are they doing today? They have built Turkish post offices. They've changed the school curriculum to Turkish standards. They've appointed Turkish-speaking governors. They're issuing Turkish ID cards. It's not a buffer zone. It's a province.
It's not just a military deployment, it's an administrative annexation, creeping imperialism.
Exactly. And then look at their military base. They have a permanent base in Iraq to fight the Kurds. They have one in Qatar to protect the regime. They have one in Somalia to train the army and control the port. They have troops in Libya backing one side of the civil war. The pattern is absolute. Once the Turkish boot hits the ground, it plants a flag. It does not leave.
So the fear is that if Turkish troops enter Gaza under any pretext, it becomes de facto Turkish territory.
Or at the very least, a Turkish sphere of influence that Israel can never, ever dislodge. And for Israel, this is described in the documents as the ultimate nightmare scenario. Just imagine it for a second. You have, say, 1,000 Turkish soldiers in Gaza City or Khan Yunis.
And there are still Hamas remnants hiding there, which there inevitably will be.
Exactly. Hamas terrorists could be operating literally from the building next door to a Turkish barracks. They could fire a rocket and then run behind the Turkish. If the IDF identifies that threat, what can they do? Cannot fire. Because if you hit a Turkish soldier, a soldier from a NATO member state, you are sparking an international crisis of unbelievable proportion. You are potentially triggering Article 5 discussion. You are creating a diplomatic catastrophe that Washington would never allow.
It effectively acts as a human shield for Hamas, but with a NATO flag.
A NATO-grade human shield. It denies Israel all freedom of operation in Gaza, permanent. And the source argues that Erdoğan knows this perfectly well. His goal isn't just to keep the peace. His goal is to have a permanent foothold to project power from Israel's southern border.
So he would be squeezing Israel from the south in Gaza.
Yeah.
And that connects perfectly to what he's doing on the northern border. Because the source has spent a lot of time talking about Syria and the fall of the Assad.
This is a crucial piece of the puzzle. You have to look at the map again. The source material treats the fall of Bashar al-Assad after 58 years of that family's brutal rule as a major geopolitical earthquake, the biggest shift in the Levant in decades.
And they frame it very specifically as a religious victory, right? Not just a political one.
They do. They call it a Sunni victory over the Shia. For years, the Assad regime was the absolute linchpin of Iranian power in the Levant. It was propped up by Iran and Hezbollah, the Shiite act. But now, with Russia bogged down in Ukraine and Iran weakened by internal dissent and Israeli strikes, that whole support structure just crumbled. And who stepped into the back?
The Sultan.
The Sultan. And the source describes this as Turkey attempting to implement the Lebanon, but for Syria. Just as Iran controlled Lebanon for decades through their proxies,
Turkey wants to control Syria through their own proxies.
Exactly. And the main character in this drama is a man named Abu Muhammad
al-Julani. Okay, he's the guy running the show in Idlib, the big rebel stronghold. But is he really Turkey's guy? I mean, he's got a bit of a checkered past, to put it mildly. He came out of al-Qaeda.
To put it very, very mildly. He was the founder of the Nusra Front, al-Qaeda's arm in Syria. But the source asks a very provocative question. Is Julani a Turkish puppet? Right. Or is he an independent actor who just happens to align?
And what's the verdict from the analyst?
The verdict is that he is heavily in debt to Erdoğan. The source argues that Julani didn't just wake up one morning and decide to overthrow Assad and take Aleppo all on his own. That's not how it works. He needed he needed weapons, he needed money. He needed what the source calls oxygen.
And that oxygen came from the north, across the border.
It came exclusively across the Turkish border. For years, his jihadist recruits flowed through Turkey, his supplies flowed through Turkey, his wounded fighters were treated in Turkish hospitals. The source argues that this was a classic Turkish strategy. Build up your proxy, wait for your rivals, in this case Russia and Hezbollah, to be distracted, and then you...
So even if Julani is now wearing a suit and trying to look like a statesman for Western audiences, at the end of the day, he knows who pays the electric bill.
He knows who holds the leash. He owes his survival and his victory to Ankara. And this brings us right back to that ghost map of the Ottoman Empire. Remember, modern Syria was ruled by the Ottomans from Istanbul for 400 years. For Erdoğan, this isn't just foreign policy, this is reclaiming lost territory, a lost sphere of influence. He views himself as the patron of the new Syria.
It's just amazing when you zoom out. You have this growing pressure from the north in Syria and this ambition for pressure from the south in Gaza. It really does look like a strategic pincer movement aimed right at Israel.
It is, and it's all driven by this one, grand ambition to replace Iran as the hegemon of the Middle East.
That's a huge claim in the source that Turkey is actively trying to replace Iran as the primary power in the region. I mean, we spent the last 20 years hearing about the Iranian threat. Are we just swapping one major headache for another one?
That is the central thesis of the neo-Ottoman dream. For the last 20 or 30 years, the entire story of the Middle East has been the Shiite crescent Iran extending its power and influence through its proxies in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen.
But the sources are arguing that crescent is now fading or even breaking.
The Shiite axis is weakening significantly. Assad falls in Syria. Hezbollah takes heavy hits from Israel and is losing legitimacy. Iran itself is internally unstable, protests, and a struggling economy. And Erdoğan sees this massive opening. He wants the Sunni axis, led by Turkey, to rise up.
There's that incredible story about Bernard Lewis in the notes. The historian. I absolutely love this detail. It feels so prophetic.
Well, the prophecy, yes. It's an amazing anecdote. Bernard Lewis, arguably the most famous Western historian of the Middle East in the 20th century, he predicted this exact scenario 30 years ago. He told the author of one of our main sources, mark my word, one day Turkey will become Iran, and Iran will become Turkey.
That is just mind-blowing. Can we unpack what he actually meant by that? Because on the surface, it sounds crazy.
Well, think about what those countries were 30 years. Turkey was secular, it was Western aligned, it was desperate to join the European Union. Iran was a radical, anti-Western theocracy. He meant that their roles would reverse. Turkey would become radicalized and Islamist and expansionist, and the Iranian regime would eventually crumble from the inside. And its people would yearn for secularism, for freedom, for connection to the West.
And the source argues we're watching that happen in real time right now.
We are living in the Bernard Lewis timeline. Turkey is becoming the radical power, championing the Islamist cause across the region. But there's a really important nuance here that the expert in the source material points out. Turkey wants Iran to be weak, but not too weak, not yet.
Why? I mean, that seems counterintuitive. Wouldn't a total collapse of your main rival be a good thing? If I'm Erdoğan, don't I want the mullahs in Tehran to fall tomorrow?
Not if you share a long, mountainous, and porous border with them. If the Iranian regime totally collapses tomorrow, you get absolute chaos. You get civil war between different ethnic groups. And most importantly, for Erdoğan, you get millions of them.
The refugee crisis. That's his Achilles heel.
It's a massive political liability for him. Turkey already hosts millions of Syrian refugees, which has caused huge social and economic. It's one of the few issues where he is genuinely unpopular. The last thing he wants or needs is another 3 million desperate Iranians crossing the mountains.
So he wants a managed decline of Iran. He wants them just weak enough so he can take their spot as the regional leader, but strong enough to keep their own borders shut.
Exactly. It's a very delicate balance. He wants to steal their crown, but he doesn't want to inherit their problem.
Now, you can't talk about this rising Sunni power without talking about the money, because these ambitions are expensive. Building proxies, running military bases, reviving an empire that costs a fortune. And as we mentioned, Turkey's economy is shaky. Inflation is sky high. So where is the cash coming from to fund this grand expansion? This brings us to the dynamic duo.
The buy one, get one free alliance, Turkey and Qatar.
The source calls it a bookstore campaign. Explain that relationship. Why are these two so incredibly tight?
It's a perfectly symbiotic relationship. The source puts it very blunt. Qatar provides the money, and the quote they use, translated from the region, is money like trash.
Money like trash. That is a vivid image.
It basically translates to money like rubbish, meaning they have so much of it, it's just abundant, it's everywhere. They have functionally unlimited resources from their gas fund, the ideology. But what does Qatar not have? It's a tiny peninsula. They have a massive gas field, but they have no military weight. They have no strategic depth. If a neighbor like Saudi Arabia decided to invade, Qatar couldn't defend itself alone for more than a few hours.
And that's where Turkey comes in. They're the muscle.
Turkey provides the military muscle, the manpower, the geopolitical weight of being a major G20 nation and a NATO member. They have a permanent military Beitar. They are, in effect, the regime's bodyguard.
So Qatar writes the check, and Turkey sends the troops. It's a partnership of money and power.
In many ways, yes. They operate as a package, and crucially, they share the exact same ideology. Unwavering support for the Muslim Brotherhood and political Islam across the region.
And the source gets really, really specific about their combined control over Hamas.
Yes, this was fascinating. The source asserts, based on their intelligence, that the day-to-day decision-making regarding Hamas is roughly 51% Qatar Qatar and 49% Turkey.
Wow, that is an incredibly tight split. It's basically a coin flip.
It shows just how integrated they are. It's not one leading the other, it's a part. And the danger highlighted here brings us back to the day after in Gaza. If the international community allows Qatar and Turkey to run the reconstruction of Gaza, the source argues with absolute certainty that Hamas will never...
Because why would they disarm their own system, their own project?
Exactly. They will find a way to support Hamas above or below the table. If you have Qatari money flowing in for reconstruction and Turkish troops standing guard as peacekeepers, Hamas survive. They might change their name, they might wear different uniforms, but the ideology, the structure, and the key personnel will remain.
This all sounds like a massive growing headache for the West. And yet, Turkey is in NATO. They're supposed to be our guys. They have the second largest army in the entire alliance.
The frenemy within the gates, the ultimate frenemy.
So why does NATO put up with this? I mean, Erdoğan is constantly bashing the West. He's buying Russian S-400 missile systems. He's supporting Hamas. Why not just kick them out? Is it just too complicated?
It's not just complicated. The sources argue it would be geographic suicide for the alliance out. You have to look at the map again. Turkey is the bridge. It controls the Bosphorus Strait, the only way in and out of the Black Sea for the entire Russian fleet. It physically sits between Europe and the chaos of the Middle East.
It's the buffer, the gatekeeper.
It's the ultimate buffer. If you kick Turkey out of NATO, you lose that buffer. You lose control of the Black Sea. And crucially, you push them fully and permanently into the arms of Russia or China. The West calculates that it is better to have a difficult, problematic Turkey inside the tent, where you have some leverage, than a completely hostile Turkey outside, actively working against you with other powers.
And there's a Trump factor here, too, isn't there? The sources mention that Erdoğan feels particularly confident about managing the U.S. administration, especially with certain leaders.
No, it's a huge factor. The source explicitly mentions that Erdoğan isn't a friend of the West in the abstract. He rails against Western imperialism all the time in his speech, but he considers himself a personal friend of Donald Trump.
It's all about personal diplomacy, not institutional alliance.
Exactly. Trump famously admires strong leaders. He likes guys who are tough, who run their countries with an iron fist, who don't get bogged down in bureaucracy and state departments. He sees a bit of himself in them, perhaps. And Erdoğan knows this. He plays to it masterfully. He bypasses the State Department and calls the White House direct.
And the source says he uses this personal connection to insert himself into things like hostage, where he shouldn't really have a role.
Correct. Even though he is fundamentally hostile to Israel, he uses that Trump connection to say, hey, I can get things done. I can talk to Hamas. I can talk to Tehran. He makes himself indispensable even to his adversaries.
It's brilliant in a very Machiavellian way. He insults you with one hand and offers to solve the problem he helped create with the other.
And gets you to host the NATO summit in his brand new 1,000-room palace while he does.
That's right. I'd forgotten about that. The 2026 NATO summit is in Turkey.
In Erdoğan's presidential palace in Ankara. Just think about the op-that. The leaders of the free world, the heads of NATO, all gathering in the palace of the man who dreams of being a sultan, who refuses to call Hamas terrorists, who is systematically dismantling secularism. It is the ultimate stamp of legitimacy, tells him and the world. We might not like you, but we accept you. We need you.
It's a total victory lap for him.
It absolutely is.
So, looking forward then, we have this neo-Ottoman dream gaining momentum. We have the boots-on-the-ground ambition. We have the powerful alliance with Qatar. Where is this all heading, specifically for relations between Turkey and Israel?
The verdict from our source material is unambiguous.
No chance of a return to the golden age of the 90s.
Yeah.
No more gas deals on the horizon.
No. The source says that as long as Erdoğan is in power, the trust is gone. It's been vaporized. There is deep, deep personal mistrust between leaders like Netanyahu and Erdoğan, but it goes way beyond just two men now. It's structural. The entire Turkish state apparatus is being reoriented.
Because he's not just a pragmatic leader looking for a deal anymore. He's on a mission. A legacy project.
He's on a legacy run. He's thinking about how history will remember him. He wants to be remembered as the leader who revived the Ottoman spirit and made Turkey a great power. And you can't be the reviver of the Ottoman spirit while also being best friends with Israel. In his current worldview, those two things are completely incompatible.
The source ends with a very stark warning about a collision course. What do they mean by that? Are we talking about a hot...
Yes. But they're clear that they don't predict a kinetic war, meaning they don't think Turkish F-16s are going to start dogfighting Israeli F-35s over the Mediterranean tomorrow. That's too risky for everyone. Turkey knows Israel has nuclear capabilities. They know the U.S. would inevitably intervene. It's mutually assured destruction.
So what does the war look like if it's not with missiles?
It looks like a collision course of influence, a constant, grinding, diplomatic, and covert war fought on every other front.
The source used the phrase diplomatic running over. I like that.
Exact. Turkey will try to run over Israeli interests everywhere and anywhere in the UN, in international courts like the ICJ, in The Hague, in trade bodies, in Jerusalem over control of holy sites, and of course in Gaza. They will use their Syria. They will use their soft power. They will fund universities and mosques and TV stations across the Balkans, Africa, and Central Asia to push their narrative. It is a new Cold War between two regional superpowers.
It really redefines how we should watch the news coming out of the region. Every little event seems to be part of this bigger struggle now.
It does. You have to stop looking at the individual headlines and start looking at the map, the big map.
Okay, so let's try to summarize the big takeaways here, because we've covered a lot of ground. First, we've seen this dramatic shift from the rational gas dealer to the ideological sultan.
Yep, the big pivot, driven by the trauma of October 7th and that deep-seated Islamist kinship, Hamas.
Second, we've seen the very real danger of the boots-on-the-ground proposal, the Turkish peacekeeping trap in Gaza.
The Roach Motel. The idea that once they check in, they stay, and they end up shielding the very groups they're supposed to.
Third, we've mapped out the rise of this incredibly powerful Turkey-Qatar axis, which is moving to fill the void left by a crumbling Iran.
The Sunni empire rising to replace the Shiite empire, the Bernard Lewis prophecy.
And finally, the paradox of the West, that NATO, the U.S., Europe, we don't like him, but we can't quit him. He's too important.
And he knows it, and he plays that card every single day.
Here's the final thought I want to leave our listeners with today. We often talk about the Middle East as a place of, endless chaos and random violence. We see an explosion here, a protest there, and it all feels disconnected. But what if we're looking at it wrong? What if we're actually watching a very old, very deliberate game of chess being played by a master?
That's the question the sources force you to ask.
Erdoğan has successfully positioned himself as the indispensable man. He insults the West, yet he gets to host the NATO summit. He attacks Israel, yet he demands a seat at the peace table. So here's the question for you to mull over. In a world where the Shiite axis of Iran is fading, are we as the West prepared for the rise of a Sunni empire that is technically part of NATO, but thinks and acts like the Ottoman Empire?
That is the defining geopolitical question of the next decade. There's no easy answer.
Keep your eyes on the map. Specifically, watch the border of Syria and watch the future of Gaza, because those lines are being redrawn, not in New York or Geneva, but in Ankara. Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive.
See you next time.